I should have known something was wrong when I saw the Craigslist ad. Nightshift diner worker, $40 per hour, immediate start, must follow workplace guidelines. Exactly. $40 an hour for flipping burgers? In retrospect, the red flags were waving so hard they could have powered a wind farm. But I was desperate that summer, staring at an $800 textbook bill for my sophomore year and a bank account that laughed at such ambitious numbers. My parents had made it clear, if I wanted to continue my psychology degree, I needed to figure out the money myself. The campus job at the library paid $7.25 an hour, barely enough to keep me in ramen noodles and cheap coffee. So when I saw that ad on a Thursday morning in June, I called the number immediately. Mel's Highway Diner, answered a gravelly voice that sounded like it had been seasoned with decades of cigarettes and regret. Hi, I'm calling about the night shift position. There was a long pause. You 18 or older? 19, sir. Good at following instructions? I thought about my strict parents, how I'd spent my childhood following their endless rules without question. Yes, sir. Very good. Do you scare easily? The question struck me as odd, but I laughed it off. No, sir. I grew up watching horror movies with my dad. Another pause. Can you work without asking too many questions? Absolutely. I was already mentally spending that $40 an hour. Can you start Monday night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.? Yes, sir. Good. Mel's Highway Diner, Route 286, about 30 minutes outside town. Ask for the rules sheet when you get there. Follow them exactly. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, replaying the conversation. Something about his tone bothered me, but $40 an hour was $40 an hour. I'd work for 3 months, save up enough for textbooks and maybe even next semester's rent, then quit before school started. Easy money. Monday night, I drove the winding stretch of Route 286 in my beat-up Honda Civic, windows down, music up, feeling optimistic about my financial future. The highway cut through dense woods and farmland, with occasional gas stations and truck stops breaking up the darkness. When I finally spotted the neon sign for Mel's Highway Diner, it was like finding a lighthouse in the middle of nowhere. The building looked like it had been transported from 1955 and left to marinate in nostalgia. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, black and white checkered floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and chrome fixtures reflected everything in that slightly distorted way that made the whole place feel like a funhouse mirror version of an American dream. Through the large windows, I could see one person inside, wiping down tables with methodical precision. I pushed through the glass door, triggering a cheerful bell that seemed too innocent for what was coming. The guy looking up at me was about my age, maybe a year older, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it and tired eyes that seemed older than his face. He wore the standard diner uniform, white shirt, black pants, and a red apron that had seen better decades. "You the new guy?" he asked, straightening up from the table he'd been cleaning. "That's me. I'm supposed to ask for the rules sheet?" He snorted, a sound that wasn't quite amusement. Rules sheet. Yeah, Mr. Hendricks is real big on his rules. He gestured toward the back. I'm Adam, by the way. Been here a whole week now, so I guess that makes me the veteran. Nice to meet you. I'm Jake. Adam led me through the diner, pointing out the basics. Coffee stations here. Always keep at least one pot going during the night shift. Register's pretty straightforward, cash or card. Kitchen's back there. Grill's not too complicated if you've ever worked food service before. Have you? Nah, this is my first restaurant job, but $40 an hour for learning on the fly? I'm not complaining. He paused at a door marked Employees Only. Your real orientation's in here, though. The break room was small and cramped, with a round table, 2 chairs, a mini fridge that hummed like it was holding on to life by sheer willpower, and a coffee maker that looked older than both of us combined. But what caught my attention was the yellowed paper taped to the wall with what appeared to be decades-old Scotch tape. The famous rules, Adam said, following my gaze. Mr. Hendricks left these for me on my first day, told me to show them to you. Fair warning, they're weird. I walked closer and read, "Night shift rules. Follow exactly rule number 1. The coffee must never go cold. Keep at least 1 pot of coffee brewing at all times between 10 p.m., 6 a.m. If all coffee goes cold, immediately restart brewing and hide in the walk-in freezer until you hear the bell ring 3 times. Rule number 2. Booth 7 stays empty. Never seat anyone in booth 7. If a customer insists, tell them it's reserved. If they sit anyway, do not serve them. Leave through the back exit immediately. Rule number 3. The red payphone protocol. When the red payphone rings, answer immediately and follow all instructions exactly. The voice will never give its name. Do not question. Do not hesitate. Disobedience means permanent termination. Rule number 4. The 2:22 a.m. kitchen check. At exactly 2:22 a.m., check that all kitchen equipment is turned off. If anything is still running, do not turn it off yourself. Call the payphone number written under the register and report it. Rule number 5. The jukebox songs. When the jukebox plays by itself, stop all activity and listen until the song ends. Blue Moon means stay behind the counter. Love Me Tender means lock the doors. House of the Rising Sun means someone will not survive the night. Rule number 6. The bathroom mirror. Rule: never look directly into the bathroom mirrors after midnight. Clean them with your eyes closed. If you accidentally see your reflection, immediately wash your hands and recite the prayer taped under the sink. Rule number 7. The ice machine warning. If the ice machine starts making noise between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., do not investigate. Unplug it from the wall and place the out of order sign on it. Wait until sunrise to plug it back in. Rule number 8. The customer count. Never serve more than 13 customers at once during the night shift. If a 14th person enters, politely tell them you're at capacity and give them a free coffee to go from the pot by the door. Never from the main coffee station. Rule number 9. The basement delivery. If someone claims to have a delivery for the basement, accept it without looking at the person or the contents. Take it to the basement door, knock 3 times, and leave it there. Do not enter the basement for any reason. Rule number 10. The morning handoff. Before your shift ends, ensure the salt shakers on every table are exactly half full. The owner will check. If any are empty or over full, you will not be paid and you will not be invited back. I read through them twice, waiting for the punchline. Is this some kind of joke? Adam shook his head. I thought so too at first. Figured it was just the owner covering his liability insurance or something. You know how paranoid small business owners can be about lawsuits. He paused, running a hand through his hair. But some of them are oddly specific. The payphone one is weird. I glanced around the break room. Where is this payphone anyway? Out by the restrooms, you'll see it, old red rotary thing that looks like it belongs in a museum. Adam grabbed 2 coffee cups from a shelf. Want some coffee? It's going to be a long night, and you might as well get used to our gourmet blend. The coffee tasted like it had been brewed with cigarette ash and broken dreams, but the caffeine was welcome. We sat at the small table, and Adam filled me in on the basics of the night shift routine. It's usually pretty quiet, he explained. We get some truckers, occasional travelers, sometimes locals who work late shifts at the factories down the highway. Most people just want coffee, pie, maybe a burger. Nothing too complicated. What's Mr. Hendricks like? Haven't really gotten to know him. He shows up every morning at 6:30 with our pay, asks if everything went okay, then leaves. Doesn't stick around to chat. Adam took a sip of his coffee and made a face. I think he might be one of those owners who started this place back when diners were still a thing, you know? Probably doesn't want to modernize because this is his life's work. That first night passed quietly. Adam showed me how to work the register, explained the kitchen setup, and taught me the art of making coffee that wouldn't poison the customers. We fell into an easy rhythm. He'd handle the grill while I took orders and managed the front. The customers were exactly what he'd described. Tired truckers, a few night shift workers grabbing dinner, a couple of teenagers on what looked like a first date. During the quiet hours between 2 and 4 a.m., we talked. Adam was a junior at the state university, majoring in business with dreams of opening his own restaurant someday. He had a younger sister named Sarah who was starting her freshman year in the fall, and he was working this job to help with her college expenses. My parents died in a car accident when I was 17, he told me, staring into his coffee cup. Sarah was only 15. I've been taking care of her since then, working whatever jobs I could find while finishing high school. This job, it's the first time I've been able to save any real money. I shared my own story. Middle-class parents who believed in the value of hard work, my psychology major, my dreams of maybe becoming a counselor someday. We found common ground in our shared financial struggles and determination to make something of ourselves. The second night felt even more natural. We'd established our roles, learned each other's rhythms, and discovered we had similar senses of humor. Adam had a way of making even the mundane aspects of the job entertaining with his running commentary on the customers. "See the guy in booth 3? He said, nodding toward a middle-aged man in a trucker cap. "I bet he's going to order black coffee and apple pie, ask for extra napkins, leave a $2 tip, and tell us about his ex-wife in Dallas." 5 minutes later, the man did exactly that, including the story about how his ex-wife had run off with a dental hygienist named Chuck. "How did you know?" I asked as we cleaned up after his departure. Adam grinned. "Pattern recognition. You work nights long enough, you start seeing the same types. Everyone's got their story, but most stories fall into categories. What category do we fall into? College kids who think they're smarter than they actually are, working a job that pays too well for what it requires, blissfully unaware that life is about to teach them a very expensive lesson." We both laughed, but looking back, Adam's words carried more weight than either of us realized. By the third night, we'd settled into genuine friendship. The work was easy enough, the pay was incredible, and we'd found someone our own age to share the strange isolation of the night shift. We swapped stories about college, complained about professors, and made plans for what we'd do with our summer earnings. "I'm thinking about taking Sarah on a real vacation before she starts school," Adam said as we cleaned the grill near the end of our shift. "Somewhere we've never been. Maybe the beach or one of those theme parks she used to talk about when we were kids." "That sounds perfect. She's lucky to have you looking out for her." "Yeah, well, family's family, right?" He paused, looking out the front windows at the empty parking lot. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if our parents hadn't died. Would I have been more like other college kids, partying, dating, not worrying about anyone but myself? You'd probably be broke and flunking out like half the people in my dorm," I said. "Responsibility builds character. Character's overrated. I'd rather have had normal parents and normal problems." We finished our cleaning in comfortable silence. It was 5:45 a.m., almost time for Mr. Hendricks to arrive with our pay. Adam was wiping down the counter while I made sure all the salt shakers were exactly half full, per rule number 10. I'd started thinking of them as Adam's rules, since he'd been there longer, and seemed to have accepted their weird specificity as just another quirk of small business ownership. That's when it happened. The red payphone rang. I'd noticed it before. An old rotary phone mounted on the wall between the restrooms and the kitchen entrance. It was bright red, clearly vintage, but in perfect condition. The kind of thing that belonged in a museum or an antique shop, not a working diner. It had been silent for 3 nights, and I'd started to think it might be disconnected. The ring was sharp, urgent, cutting through the early morning quiet like a fire alarm. Adam and I both froze, staring at it, then at each other. Neither of us moved for what felt like a full minute, but was probably only seconds. "Rule number 3, Adam said quietly. I nodded, remembering. When the red payphone rings, answer immediately and follow all instructions exactly. My legs felt heavy as I walked across the diner floor. The phone continued ringing, each tone seeming louder than the last. I reached for the receiver, my hand trembling slightly, and lifted it to my ear. Hello? Hello? The voice that answered was unlike anything I'd expected. It was calm, unnaturally so, with a strange electronic distortion that made it sound like it was coming through water or static. There was something clinical about it, devoid of any warmth or humanity. Wipe down table 6 twice, clockwise only. I waited for more, a name, an explanation, anything that would make this make sense. But the line went dead with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the diner. Adam was staring at me from behind the counter, his cleaning rag frozen in his hand. Well, what did they say? Wipe down table 6 twice, clockwise only. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I was repeating something from a dream. That's it? I nodded, still holding the receiver even though the line was dead. Must be Mr. Hendricks checking up on us remotely or something. Adam's laugh sounded forced. Micromanaging much? Well, you heard the boss. Better go wipe table 6. I hung up the phone and walked to table 6, grabbing a clean rag from the service station. The table looked perfectly clean already, but I followed the instruction exactly, twice. Clockwise only. Adam watched me the entire time, and I could feel his unease matching my own. There, I said, finishing the second wipe. Happy now? Mysterious voice. This job just keeps getting weirder, Adam muttered, but he was trying to sound casual. I could hear the tension underneath. The rest of that shift passed without incident. Mr. Hendricks arrived at 6:30 a.m. as usual, a thin man in his 60s with hollow eyes and graying hair that looked like it hadn't seen a proper cut in months. He handed us each our pay in cash, 3 crisp $20 bills and 4 tens, and asked his standard question. Everything goes smoothly last night? Yes, sir, I answered, deciding not to mention the phone call. Something about his expression made me think he already knew about it anyway. He nodded and left without another word. Adam and I walked out to the parking lot together, exhausted but richer than we'd ever been for 8 hours of work. See you tomorrow night, Adam said, climbing into his beat-up Ford. Try not to dream about mysterious phone voices. If only he'd known how prophetic those words would become. Night 4 started normally enough. Adam and I fell back into our routine, coffee brewing, register ready, kitchen prepped for whatever the highway might bring our way. Around 11 p.m., we had a steady stream of truckers and night shift workers. I was starting to feel comfortable with the job, confident that I could handle whatever the summer threw at me. Then, at 2:33 a.m., the red payphone rang again. This time, neither of us hesitated. I walked over and picked it up on the third ring. Hello? Turn off the coffee maker for exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. The voice was the same, but somehow different, like it was wearing a different mask. The clinical tone remained, but there was something else underneath it that I couldn't identify. Turn off the coffee maker for exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds, I repeated to Adam, who was already looking at me with that mix of curiosity and dread I was beginning to recognize. That's specific, he said, but he walked over to the coffee station and switched off the machine. I pulled out my phone and set a timer. We stood there in the suddenly quiet diner, watching the timer count down. 3 minutes and 17 seconds felt like an eternity. When the timer went off, Adam switched the machine back on, and we both let out breaths we didn't realize we'd been holding. Our micromanaging boss strikes again, Adam said, but his joke fell flat. We both knew this was beyond normal management paranoia. Night 5 brought another call at 1:47 a.m. Move all salt shakers to the counter. Do not let customers touch them. We followed the instruction without question, gathering salt shakers from every table and booth and lining them up on the counter near the register. When a trucker asked for salt for his eggs 20 minutes later, I made up some excuse about health department regulations. He left grumbling about government overreach, but he left with his eggs unsalted. Why do you think they wanted the salt moved? Adam asked as we cleaned up after the trucker's departure. No idea. Maybe they're worried about contamination or something. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Nothing about these calls made sense from a normal business perspective. They felt like tests or preparations for something neither of us understood. By night 6, I found myself dreading the sound of that phone. It had become the focal point of our shifts, this red rotary monster that sat silent for hours before delivering its cryptic instructions. Adam had started making nervous jokes about our mystery caller, but I could see the strain in his eyes. The easy camaraderie of our first few nights was being replaced by a constant underlying tension. That night, the call came during our busiest period. A family of 4 had stopped in, parents and 2 young kids on what looked like a cross-country road trip. They were tired, hungry, and the kids were getting cranky. Adam was working the grill while I took their order and tried to keep the children entertained with crayons and coloring sheets we kept behind the counter. I was so focused on managing the family that I forgot to check the coffee. Both pots were busy brewing when the family arrived, but as I served their food and refilled their drinks, I didn't notice that both machines had finished and shut off automatically. The coffee was cooling. It was Adam who realized what was happening. He'd just flipped their burgers and was reaching for plates when he glanced at the coffee station and went pale. "Jake," he said quietly, his voice tight with something I'd never heard before. "Fear." I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. Both coffee pots were sitting on their warmers, completely full, but no longer steaming. Rule number 1 echoed in my mind. The coffee must never go cold. If all coffee goes cold, immediately restart brewing and hide in the walk-in freezer until you hear the bell ring 3 times. That's when we heard it. Scratching. Inside the walls. Not the normal settling sounds of an old building, but something deliberate and organic. Like dozens of claws scraping against metal pipes, trying to get out. Or in. The sound seemed to be moving, traveling through the walls from the kitchen toward the dining area. The family didn't seem to notice, too busy with their food and trying to corral their tired children. But Adam and I stood frozen, listening to that horrible scratching grow louder and more insistent. "Just old pipes," Adam whispered, but his voice shook. "Buildings this old always make weird noises." I nodded, but my hands were trembling as I rushed to restart the coffee makers. The moment I hit the switches and fresh brewing began, the scratching stopped. Completely. Like someone had thrown a switch. We served the rest of the family's meal in tense silence, both of us jumping at every normal sound. A car door slamming in the parking lot, the hum of the ice machine, even the soft ding of the register. When they finally left, tipping generously and commenting on how atmospheric the old diner was, Adam and I just stared at each other. "What the hell was that?" Adam asked. "I don't know." And I really didn't. But I was starting to understand that the rules weren't just eccentric management policies. They were instructions for survival. Night 7 was when everything changed. It started normally enough. We had our usual scattered customers, a couple of truckers, a nurse getting off her shift at the county hospital, a young couple who looked like they were driving all night to escape something, standard highway traffic for a Wednesday night in the middle of nowhere. Then, around 2:15 a.m., the ice machine started making noise, not the normal sound of ice dropping into the bin, but something else entirely. Scratching, like we'd heard in the walls when the coffee went cold, but worse. More frantic. And underneath it, something that sounded almost like whispering. Adam immediately started toward the kitchen to investigate, but I grabbed his arm. "Rule 7, I said. He stopped, remembering. If the ice machine starts making noise between 1 a.m., 4 a.m., do not investigate. Unplug it from the wall and place the out of order sign on it. Wait until sunrise to plug it back in. We looked at each other for a long moment. The scratching and whispering continued, growing more agitated. "This is insane," Adam said, but he followed me to the kitchen anyway. The ice machine was an old commercial unit, probably installed when the diner was built. The scratching was definitely coming from inside it, and when we got closer, I could swear I heard actual words mixed in with the noise. Not English words, but something that sounded like language. I unplugged the machine from the wall. The sounds stopped immediately, like we'd severed the connection to whatever was making them. Adam grabbed the laminated out-of-order sign from the utility closet and taped it to the front of the machine. "I don't want to know what was in there," he said quietly. Neither did I, but I was starting to suspect we'd find out eventually. The rest of the night passed in uneasy quiet. We were both on edge, jumping at shadows and checking the coffee obsessively. Around 4:30 a.m., when we only had an hour and a half left in our shift, a man in a dark coat walked through the front door. He was middle-aged, average height, with thinning brown hair and pale skin that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. Nothing about him seemed particularly threatening, but something was wrong. He moved too smoothly, like he was gliding rather than walking, and his eyes never seemed to blink. He walked directly to booth 7 and sat down. Adam and I exchanged glances. Rule number 2, booth 7 stays empty. Never seat anyone in booth 7. If a customer insists, tell them it's reserved. If they sit anyway, do not serve them. Leave through the back exit immediately. "Excuse me, sir," I called out, my voice not quite steady. "That booth is reserved." The man turned to look at me and I felt something cold crawl up my spine. His eyes were wrong somehow, too dark, too deep, like looking into empty wells. "Reserved for whom?" His voice was perfectly normal, polite even, but it made my teeth ache. "It's permanently reserved, sir. Company policy. I can seat you anywhere else in the diner." He smiled, showing teeth that were too white and too sharp. "I'll stay here, thank you." Adam was already backing toward the kitchen, remembering the rule's final instruction. I wanted to follow him, to run out the back door and keep running until we reached the highway, but something kept me frozen in place. The man just sat there, hands folded on the table, staring at me with those horrible dark eyes. For the next hour and 15 minutes, he didn't move, didn't order anything, didn't speak. Just sat in booth 7, watching us with that unblinking stare. Adam and I went through the motions of our closing routine, but we couldn't concentrate on anything except those eyes tracking our every movement. When 6 a.m. finally arrived, we practically ran through our end-of-shift checklist. Salt shakers half full, coffee machines cleaned, register counted. We were finishing up when Mr. Hendricks walked through the front door for his morning visit. The man in booth 7 was gone. I hadn't seen him leave. One moment he was there, staring at us with those empty eyes, and the next moment the booth was empty. No sound of the door opening, no footsteps, nothing. Mr. Hendricks walked over to us, carrying his usual envelope of cash. But instead of his standard question about whether everything had gone smoothly, he looked directly at me and asked, "Any problems with the booth last night?" The way he said it, casual like he was asking about the weather, made my blood run cold. He knew. He'd always known. These weren't just arbitrary rules left by an eccentric owner. They were survival instructions, and Mr. Hendricks was checking to make sure we were still alive to follow them. "No problems," I managed to say. "Everything went fine." He nodded, handed us our pay, and left without another word. Adam and I walked out to the parking lot in silence. The morning sun was rising over the highway, turning the asphalt golden and making everything look normal again. But normal was an illusion now. I could feel it cracking around the edges, showing glimpses of something darker underneath. "Jake," Adam said as we reached our cars. His voice was quiet, shaky. "What the hell have we gotten ourselves into?" I looked back at the diner, with its cheerful neon sign and retro charm. In the daylight, it looked harmless, nostalgic, like something from a postcard advertising simpler times. "I don't know," I said, "but I think we're going to find out." Neither of us mentioned quitting. We both needed the money too desperately. But as I drove home that morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that money might not be worth whatever price this job was going to demand. The red payphone hadn't rung that night, but somehow that felt more ominous than the cryptic instructions, like something was watching us, testing our obedience, preparing us for whatever came next. I should have quit then. Adam should have quit too. But $40 an hour was $40 an hour, and we were both too young and too desperate to understand that some jobs cost more than they pay. We'd learn that lesson soon enough. I should have known that the phone call coming at 12:07 a.m. on our 8th night would change everything. The diner's quiet hum was shattered by that shrill ring, cutting through the air like a blade. My chest tightened instantly as I realized this wasn't going to be another simple instruction about wiping tables or moving salt shakers. I hesitated for a moment, my heartbeat thundering loud enough to fill the small space between the restrooms and kitchen where that cursed red phone hung on the wall. Finally, I lifted the receiver with trembling fingers. "Hello?" The voice that answered was colder than I'd ever heard it before, carrying an otherworldly detachment that made my skin crawl. "The woman in booth 2 is not what she seems. Do not make eye contact. Serve her coffee, but pour it with your back turned." I glanced toward booth 2, my stomach dropping. Sitting there was a middle-aged woman in a crumpled beige coat, hunched over a cup of black coffee. She looked exhausted, with pallid skin and dark circles under her eyes that suggested she'd been driving for days without rest. Nothing about her appeared threatening or unusual. Adam was behind the register, his eyes wide with that familiar mixture of curiosity and dread we'd both developed whenever the phone rang. He was waiting for me to relay the message, but every instinct in my body was screaming that this was different. This wasn't about cleaning or coffee maintenance. This was a warning. "The woman in booth 2, I said quietly, my voice barely carrying across the diner. "I'm supposed to serve her coffee but not look at her directly." Adam's face went pale. "What the hell does that mean?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. Instead, I walked slowly to the coffee station, my legs feeling like lead. The woman hadn't looked up when I approached, remaining focused on the cup in her hands. I could hear her breathing, slow, measured, too deliberate for someone who was simply tired. Turning my back to her, I poured fresh coffee into a clean cup, the dark liquid splashing against the porcelain with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet diner. My hands shook slightly as I carried the cup to her table, setting it down without meeting her gaze. "Thank you," she said, her voice perfectly normal, almost pleasant. I nodded and started to walk away, but something made me glance at the metal coffee pot still sitting on her table from her previous order. In its warped, reflective surface, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood turn to ice. The reflection wasn't of the tired woman I'd just served. It was something else entirely, a grotesque parody of human features with elongated teeth that protruded from a too-wide grin, and where her eyes should have been were hollow, empty sockets that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I gasped and stumbled backward, knocking into Adam, who had been watching from behind the counter. "You saw it, didn't you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yeah," I managed to say, my throat dry. That wasn't her. The woman, or whatever she really was, suddenly stood, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the diner. She turned toward the door, and as she walked past us, I heard her let out a low, guttural hiss that seemed to vibrate through the linoleum tiles beneath our feet. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness outside. Adam and I stood frozen for several minutes, neither of us speaking. The normal sounds of the night gradually returned, the hum of the ice machine, the distant rumble of trucks on the highway, the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. But the atmosphere in the diner had changed permanently. We both felt it. "Those rules," Adam said finally, his voice shaky. "They're not just weird policies, are they?" "No," I replied, staring at the empty booth where the thing had been sitting. "They're survival instructions." Night 9 brought no relief from the escalating horror. If anything, it was worse. The phone rang at 1:23 a.m., jolting both of us from the uneasy silence we'd maintained since opening. I answered it with growing dread, already knowing that whatever instruction came next would test us further. Hide in the storage room for exactly 11 minutes. Do not come out no matter what you hear. The voice delivered this command with the same clinical detachment, but there was something else underneath it now, an urgency that made my hands shake as I hung up the phone. "What now?" Adam asked, though I could tell from his expression that he already knew it was going to be bad. "Storage room, 11 minutes. Don't come out no matter what we hear." Adam's face went ashen. "Jake, what if there are customers? We can't just abandon—" "Look around," I interrupted, gesturing to the empty diner. "When was the last time we had a customer after one of these calls?" He looked around and realized I was right. The diner was completely empty, as if something had driven away anyone who might have wandered in. We hurried to the cramped storage room behind the kitchen, squeezing past boxes of supplies and old equipment. The space smelled of dust and cleaning chemicals, and the single bare bulb cast harsh shadows on the walls. I checked my phone for the time and started a countdown timer for 11 minutes. Then we waited. For the first few minutes, everything was quiet except for our nervous breathing and the distant hum of the diner's equipment. Then, gradually, other sounds began to filter through the thin walls. It started with furniture being moved, the scrape of tables and chairs across the floor, but the sounds weren't random. They were deliberate, purposeful, as if someone was rearranging the entire dining area. Then came the growling, low, animalistic sounds that didn't belong to any creature I could identify. They seemed to be coming from multiple sources, moving around the diner with predatory intent. Adam grabbed my arm, his fingernails digging into my skin as we listened to whatever was happening outside our hiding place. The growling was joined by other sounds, sharp crashes as dishes were shattered, the screech of metal being torn, and underneath it all, a high-pitched keening that sounded almost like screaming, but not quite human. "What the fuck is that?" Adam whispered, his voice barely audible. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. My timer showed 6 more minutes remaining, but it felt like hours. The sounds outside grew more violent, more chaotic. Something heavy slammed against the storage room door, making both of us jump. Adam's grip on my arm tightened until I thought he might cut off circulation. Finally, mercifully, the timer reached 0, but the sounds didn't stop immediately. For another 30 seconds, the chaos continued. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, everything went silent. A moment later, I heard the familiar sound of the walk-in freezer's bell ringing 3 times. We emerged from the storage room cautiously, expecting to find the diner destroyed. Instead, everything looked normal except for one detail that made my stomach lurch. There was a dark stain on the floor beneath booth 5. Fresh blood, still wet, spreading slowly across the black and white tiles. But there were customers in the diner now, 3 truckers and an elderly couple, all acting as if nothing unusual had happened. They sat in their booths, quietly eating and drinking, completely oblivious to the blood that was literally pooling beneath one of their tables. "How is that possible?" Adam whispered as we returned to our positions behind the counter. I had no answer. The rules were protecting us from something, but they were also trapping us in a reality that made less sense with each passing night. Night 10 was when Adam finally reached his breaking point. The call came at 3:15 a.m. during what should have been the quietest part of our shift. I answered with the resignation of someone who had already accepted that normal no longer applied to our lives. The man at the counter must not leave. Keep refilling his coffee. If he stands to go, break his mug. I looked at the counter where a lone trucker sat, wearing a Yankees cap and nursing what appeared to be his 3rd cup of coffee. He looked completely ordinary, tired eyes, stubbled jaw, the weathered hands of someone who spent his life gripping a steering wheel. There was nothing threatening about him. When I relayed the instruction to Adam, he shook his head firmly. "No," he said, his voice carrying a note of defiance I hadn't heard before. "I'm not going to assault some random guy just because a voice on the phone told us to. This has gone too far." "Adam, after what we've seen—" "What have we seen, really?" he interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Reflections in coffee pots? Sounds in the walls? We don't know what any of this means. For all we know, we're being pranked by some sick bastard with too much time on his hands. I wanted to argue with him, but part of me understood his frustration. The rational part of my mind was still desperately trying to find logical explanations for everything we'd experienced. The trucker finished his coffee and stood up, reaching for his wallet. Adam and I both watched him, tension crackling between us like electricity. As the man took a step toward the door, I made a choice. I grabbed the nearest coffee mug and smashed it against the counter. The ceramic shattered with a sharp crack that echoed through the diner. The trucker stopped mid-step and turned to look at me, and in that moment, his entire appearance changed. His face elongated, the skin stretching tight over bones that shifted and cracked audibly. His mouth opened to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth, far too many for any human jaw. His eyes began to glow with a malevolent red light that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside his skull. He let out a snarl that sounded like it came from the depths of hell itself, a sound that made every glass in the diner vibrate. Then he turned and stalked out, moving with a fluid, inhuman grace that made my skin crawl. Adam stood frozen, staring at the door where the thing had disappeared. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. What was that? But our night wasn't over yet. As we cleaned up the broken mug, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Through the pass-through window to the back office, I saw something that made my heart stop. A figure stood in the shadows, 7 feet tall, with skin that looked like it had been stretched over a frame too large for it. Its eyes reflected the fluorescent light like an animal's, and when it moved, it made no sound at all. It watched us for perhaps 10 seconds, then melted back into the darkness, as if it had never been there. The enforcer. I knew instinctively that's what it was, the thing that made sure the rules were followed, that punished those who disobeyed. When Adam found the scratches on his car the next morning, deep gouges in the paint that looked like claw marks, we both knew we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. The photographs that appeared on our work counter throughout the following day made it even clearer. Pictures of Adam sleeping in his own bed, taken from inside his apartment. We were being watched, studied, judged. Night 11 brought the most terrifying development yet. The voice on the phone knew about Sarah. Adam's sister Sarah called him today at 3 p.m., it said with that same clinical detachment. She's driving cross-country. She'll stop here tomorrow night. Adam hadn't mentioned the call to anyone at work. Hell, he'd barely mentioned Sarah's road trip to me, and only in passing. Yet somehow, this entity knew the exact time she'd called, knew her travel plans, knew she would be coming to the diner. When Adam tried to call in sick the next day, his phone line was dead. When I tried to call Mr. Hendricks on his behalf, I got a recording saying the number was no longer in service. That evening, Adam found Mr. Hendricks waiting outside his apartment building. "You have a job to finish, son," the old man said, his voice carrying a finality that left no room for argument. As Adam recounted this conversation to me the following night, I realized the horrible truth. We weren't employees anymore. We were prisoners, trapped in a game whose rules we were only beginning to understand, and the stakes were higher than we'd ever imagined. Sarah was coming, and something told me that our ability to protect her, and ourselves, would be the ultimate test of everything we'd learned about survival in this place that wore the mask of a simple highway diner. The red payphone hung silent on the wall, but its presence felt more ominous than ever. Whatever was coming next, I knew it would push us to our absolute limits, and I wasn't sure we were strong enough to survive it. The morning before our 12th night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat in my apartment, staring at the water stains on my ceiling, replaying every horrific detail from the past 11 nights, the scratches on Adam's car, the photos of him sleeping in his own bed, the hollow look that had taken permanent residence in Mr. Hendricks' eyes. It all pointed to one inescapable truth. We weren't just employees anymore. We were prisoners, and the bars of our cage were made of rules written in blood. Sarah was coming tonight. Adam had called her 6 times throughout the day, begging her to change her route, to drive straight through without stopping. But she'd laughed off his concerns with the easy dismissal of someone who'd never seen the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of ordinary things. "You're being paranoid, big brother," she'd said during their last call. "I need to stretch my legs anyway, and I want to see where you work. It'll be fun, like a surprise visit." Fun. The word tasted like ash in my mouth when Adam repeated it to me that evening. Night 12. The Arrival. I arrived at the diner early, finding Adam already there, pacing behind the counter like a caged animal. His usually neat dark hair was disheveled, and the dark circles under his eyes told me he hadn't slept any more than I had. The diner felt different that night. The air was thicker, more oppressive, like the building itself was holding its breath. The red payphone hung silent on its mount between the restrooms, but its presence felt more ominous than ever. Every shadow seemed alive, every noise amplified. The diner was waiting. "She'll be here around midnight," Adam said without preamble, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "I tried everything, Jake. I told her the diner was closed, that there was construction on the highway, even that I'd quit the job. She didn't believe any of it." The hours leading up to midnight stretched longer than any night before. Adam's fingers drummed nervously on the counter, his eyes darting toward the door more times than I could count. "This is it," he said quietly. "Once she walks through that door, nothing will ever be the same." At 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before midnight, the red payphone rang. The sound was like a death knell cutting through the oppressive silence. I walked to the phone with leaden feet, each step feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. "Hello?" "The girl approaching the diner is not Adam's sister," the voice said with its familiar clinical detachment. "The real Sarah is already in the basement with the others. The imposter cannot be turned away by normal rules. It feeds on emotional pain. Serve it decaf coffee only. Do not engage in conversation beyond necessity. Observe its performance until sunrise." The line went dead. They already had her. While we'd been worrying, something had taken Sarah and replaced her with an entity designed to torture Adam psychologically. "What did they say?" Adam asked, though I could see from my expression that he already knew it was devastating. "She's not coming, Adam," I said quietly. "She's already here, in the basement. That thing walking through our door. It's not human, and we can't make it leave." At exactly midnight, the door chime rang, and she walked in. She looked exactly like Sarah from the photos. Long, chestnut brown hair, bright hazel eyes, wearing a faded college sweatshirt. But her movements were too fluid, too precise, and when she looked at me, I saw something ancient and hungry lurking behind those familiar eyes. She walked directly to booth 7 and sat down, folding her hands with perfect posture. Of course she did. "Just coffee for now," she said sweetly when I approached with decaf. "I'm not really hungry. I ate at that truck stop about an hour back. But I'll take some cream if you have it. You know how I like my coffee, right, Adam?" For the next 6 hours, it was psychological torture. The creature regaled us with stories about Sarah's college experience, about friends Adam had never heard her mention, about childhood memories that were almost right, but slightly off. The details were perfect. Too perfect. It spoke with the mechanical precision of something that had been programmed rather than lived. Adam stood behind the counter the entire time, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge, watching this mockery of his beloved sister. I could see him breaking down with each false memory, each stolen detail of Sarah's life being twisted into a weapon against him. The creature used its mimicry like a scalpel, reaching into Adam's deepest fears and memories. "You're awfully quiet tonight," the imposter said around 3 a.m., her voice carrying hurt confusion that would have been heartbreaking if it had been real. "Are you feeling okay? I worry about you working these late hours. What if something happened? What if there was an emergency?" Adam's jaw tightened until I was afraid his teeth might crack, but he didn't respond. His silence was the only thing keeping us alive, but I could see it was killing him inside. Night 13. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. When the imposter left with sunrise, Adam collapsed behind the counter, finally allowing himself to break down. He sobbed quietly, his shoulders shaking with grief and rage. "That wasn't her," he whispered. "It knew things, private things between us, but it got them wrong, just wrong enough that I could tell it wasn't really Sarah." When I arrived at the diner that evening, Adam looked different. The defeated slump in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a grim determination that was somehow more frightening than his earlier despair. "I'm going to find her," he said. "Tonight, I'm going to find Sarah and get her out of there, or we're both going to die trying." "Adam, we can't just break the rules." "The rules are what got us into this," he interrupted. "What if we could use them differently? What if instead of just following them, we could turn them inside out somehow?" It was the first hint of the strategy that would either save us or destroy us. At 4:15 a.m., while the imposter maintained its vigil in booth 7, I made my choice. I walked to the basement door, knowing it would be unlocked, knowing they wanted us to find what was down there. The stairs descended into darkness that swallowed my phone's flashlight beam. The descent felt like entering hell itself. I found myself in a space that shouldn't have existed, filled with hospital beds in neat rows. In each bed lay an unconscious person, victims who had vanished over the years, trapped in this underground hell. The sickening stillness of the rows of beds haunted my every step. The faces of the missing people, frozen in a limbo between life and death, screamed at me silently for rescue. In the bed nearest to the stairs, I found her, the real Sarah. She looked exactly like the creature upstairs, but this one was unmistakably human, warm to the touch, with small imperfections that made her real. A tiny scar on her chin, chipped nail polish from her drive. She was alive but unreachable, trapped in artificial sleep. The faint pulse beneath my fingers was a small beacon of hope amid overwhelming despair. When I returned upstairs, Adam was waiting with desperate hope in his eyes. "Is she?" "She's alive," I said. "But Adam, there are dozens of others down there. This has been going on for decades." The weight of that knowledge settled between us. We weren't just fighting for Sarah. We were fighting for everyone who had ever been trapped by this place. Our final night began with both of us understanding that we weren't going home. Either we would break this cycle tonight, or we would become permanent parts of it. The imposter arrived at midnight, resuming its place in booth 7 with that constant, cruel smile. But this time, Adam had a plan. "Every rule has been about protection," he whispered as I poured the creature's decaf. "But what if we could overload the system? What if we could break so many rules so fast that whatever force maintains this place couldn't keep up?" "That's insane," I said. The enforcer only comes when rules are broken individually. What if we broke them all simultaneously? What if we forced a complete system failure?" At 3:33 a.m., the red payphone rang one final time. "You have proven useful," the voice said. "The pact requires renewal. One of you stays permanently. Choose by sunrise, or I choose for you." I looked at Adam, seeing my own determination reflected in his eyes. "What if neither of us chooses?" I said into the receiver. The silence stretched for heartbeats. Then you both stay. Forever. I hung up and turned to Adam. Now. We had rehearsed this. At exactly 4 a.m., we began the systematic destruction of every rule that had kept us alive. I walked into the bathroom and stared directly into the mirrors after midnight, seeing not just my own reflection, but dozens of trapped souls. Adam served a 14th customer, a shadow figure that materialized from the darkness. We let all the coffee go cold simultaneously, while I deliberately entered the basement, ignoring Rule 9 entirely. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every piece of equipment in the diner activated at once. The jukebox screaming warning songs, coffee makers erupting with boiling liquid, lights strobing like a seizure-inducing nightmare. The temperature plummeted as reality began to tear. The imposter's disguise fell away completely, revealing something that hurt to look at directly. a writhing mass of hunger and hatred that had been feeding on Adam's love for his sister. From behind the counter emerged the enforcer, 7 feet of stitched-together horror, its multiple mouths opening in a shriek that shattered every remaining glass surface. But this time, we didn't run. "The rules are broken," I shouted, grabbing the payphone receiver. "All of them. Your system is failing. Release them all." The creature lunged at us, its claws raking across Adam's shoulder as he tackled it from behind. Blood flowed freely, but he held on with desperate strength. "Jake!" he gasped. "The basement! Get them out!" I ran downstairs as reality warped around us. The machines keeping the prisoners sedated were failing, sparking and smoking as the supernatural framework collapsed. Sarah's eyes fluttered open just as I reached her. "Adam?" she whispered, confused but beautifully, perfectly real. "We're getting you out of here," I said, helping her to her feet. Upstairs, the battle raged. The enforcer and the shadow creature were being pulled toward booth 7, which had become a vortex of swirling darkness. But they fought back, and the cost was terrible. Adam lay bleeding on the floor, deep gashes across his chest from the enforcer's final attack. But he was conscious, alive, and the vortex was collapsing. Did we win?" he asked weakly. The sudden silence answered him. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on us for weeks was gone. The supernatural cold lifted, leaving only the normal sounds of a broken, empty diner. As dawn broke, Mr. Hendricks appeared in the doorway, looking decades younger than when I'd first met him. The hollow look in his eyes was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen before. Peace. 40 years, he said quietly. "You've done what I never had the courage to do. You've broken the cycle." Sarah recovered completely, though she never remembered anything after stopping for gas 2 states back. The diner was demolished 6 months later, officially due to structural damage. But I know the truth. The pact is broken here, but evil like that doesn't die. It just finds new hosts, new locations, new victims. That's why I'm telling you this story, not as entertainment, but as a warning. If you ever find a job that pays too well, if you're given rules that make no sense, if you hear phones ringing at impossible hours, run, because some rules exist for reasons you never want to discover, and some jobs cost more than they pay. The highway diner is gone, but its legacy remains. Somewhere out there, another desperate college student is answering a Craigslist ad that seems too good to be true. Be careful out there. Your life might depend on it.